Why would one of the most brilliant artists of the Renaissance, the creator of masterpieces like The Birth of Venus and Primavera, take his own paintings during his lifetime and throw them into the fire? Why would someone destroy the very work he had dedicated his life to? In the late 15th century, Florence was a city overflowing with luxury and art, but it suddenly fell under the sway of a friar named Girolamo Savonarola, who preached the end of the world and demanded the renunciation of everything he called vain. Sumptuous dresses, mirrors, books of entertainment, jewelry, and even mythological paintings filled with nudity or pagan pleasure were vanities that, according to him, corrupted the soul and had to be destroyed. In 1497, in the square of Florence, one of the darkest events in art history took place, the Bonfire of the Vanities. In a fire orchestrated by this friar, artists of the time gathered with works they had painted throughout their lives and cast them into the flames to destroy them. Among them, it is said, was none other than Sandro Botticelli. But what works can we be certain this man might have thrown into the fire? And why would someone as enlightened as him fall under the spell of a friar who convinced him to erase such a large part of his life's work? Savonarola was not just any preacher. From the pulpit of San Marco, he delivered apocalyptic sermons that seemed to come straight from the book of Revelation. He declared that Florence was the new Jerusalem, destined to be purified and transformed into the model of a holy city. He warned that unless people abandoned luxury and sin, divine judgment would fall upon them all. People listened to him with both fear and devotion. His sermons thundered against the powerful, the bankers, and even the Medici themselves, accusing them of corruption and of leading the city into moral decay. And the most astonishing part is that, little by little, all of Florence allowed itself to be carried away by his vision. What had once been the cradle of the Renaissance was becoming a city ruled by penance, fear, and the belief that the end was near. On February 7th, 1497, in the heart of Florence's Piazza della Signoria, an immense pyre was raised. But this was no symbolic act. The fire was real, and it was being fed with everything Savonarola considered vain. Young followers of the friar, known as the Piagnoni, went from house to house collecting what they called objects of sin. They entered workshops, palaces, and even humble homes. They carried off chests filled with silk dresses, wigs, finely crafted mirrors, jewels, perfumes, dice, playing cards, books labeled as frivolous, and of course, paintings and sculptures depicting nude bodies, seen as pagan pleasures to be destroyed. Once all of this was piled in the square, the bonfire was lit. Eyewitnesses reported that the flames rose as high as the nearby towers, illuminating the entire city. The crowd sang religious hymns as they watched the symbols of Florence's luxury and culture, treasures that had defined the city for decades, turn to ash. That moment became known as the Bonfire of the Vanities, one of the darkest episodes in the history of art. Thousands of objects, some of them true masterpieces, disappeared forever in a matter of hours. According to chronicles of the time, artists like Lorenzo di Credi, a contemporary of Botticelli, closed his workshop and burned with his own hands all the profane paintings he had created. Mythological scenes, portraits with sensual undertones, anything that could be considered a moral deviation, was destroyed in that moment. Today, only a Venus painted by him in 1493 survives, like an echo of the lost works that once defined his art. Another example is Fra Bartolomeo, a painter of great talent who was so deeply moved by Savonarola's words that he decided to abandon painting altogether. For years he did not touch a brush, convinced that art was a path to temptation. Only much later did he return to painting, but by then he had been permanently transformed by that period of religious fervor. These cases clearly show that the friar's influence was not mere rumor. There were indeed creators who renounced their art, whether by destroying it or abandoning it, just as may have been the case with Sandro Botticelli. But before continuing with this fascinating story, let me remind you of something. If you're an art lover like me, and you'd love to have works like these in your home to collect, now you can. On our website, you'll find a catalogue of more than 700 artworks available for you to choose your favorite and decorate your walls with a masterpiece. The video you're watching right now is an example of how you can transform your home into your own gallery. Shipping is free worldwide, and by purchasing through our site, you'll also be supporting me so I can keep creating videos like this one. Thank you so much for your support. You can find the link in the description. Now then, let's continue. If we look at Botticelli's work before and after the influence of Savonarola, the change is astonishing. In his years of splendor, Botticelli painted scenes that today define the Renaissance. The birth of Venus, with the goddess emerging from the sea, surrounded by grace, sensuality, and classical mythology. Or Primavera, where an entire garden becomes the stage for an eternal dance of nymphs and pagan gods. These works were full of beauty, poetry, and an almost hedonistic vision of life. But after the years of apocalyptic preaching, that Botticelli began to fade away. In his place appeared a far more somber painter, one deeply preoccupied with religion and spirituality. The clearest example is his Mystic Nativity, painted around 1500. This work has nothing in common with the delicate paganism of Venus. Here we see an open sky with angels rejoicing, but also demons fleeing, human figures clinging to one another as if seeking refuge, and an atmosphere thick with tension. What is most unsettling, however, is the inscription Botticelli himself left at the top of the painting. Written in Greek, it speaks of times of tribulation, of demons being bound, and of a spiritual war that echoes almost word for word the sermons of Savonarola. It is as if the painter had transformed his art into an extension of the friar's religious discourse that dominated the city. Comparing the sensuality of the birth of Venus with the apocalyptic vision of the Mystic Nativity feels as if they were created by two entirely different artists, and yet both came from the same hand, one shaped by the light of Renaissance humanism, and the other by the shadow of Savonarola's influence. Now you might be wondering, if that's the case, why do we still have works like Venus if Botticelli supposedly threw them into the bonfire of the Vanities? The truth is, there is no conclusive evidence that Botticelli ever burned his paintings. No contemporary document confirms it, and yet the myth has always persisted. The image of the repentant painter fits all too well within the context of Savonarola, especially since some of Botticelli's peers did in fact destroy or abandon their works. This fueled the legend, and the radical shift in Botticelli's art from pagan myths to deeply religious pieces like the Mystic Nativity led many to see him as a converted soul who may have wanted to erase his past. What makes this even more intriguing is that only about 50 paintings by Botticelli have survived, along with his drawings for Dante's Divine Comedy. Considering how much he must have produced throughout his career, that number feels strikingly small. So the question remains, did Botticelli really burn some of his own works in that fire? Was Savonarola's preaching persuasive enough to make an artist like him destroy part of his life's work? We'll never know for sure, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think happened? Could the bonfire of the Vanities have robbed us of a Botticelli masterpiece? Let me know in the comments.